And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dr. Serge Beddington-Behrens, Oxford-educated transpersonal psychotherapist, spiritual educator, teacher of transformation and change agent. In 2000, he was even awarded an Italian knighthood for services to humanity. Today, we're going to be discussing his book, Amazing Grace, and his transformational journey of struggling to discover his soul in a soulless world. Dr. Serge, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Nice to be here.
Well, Doc, I think it would be best if we just start with a little bit of your background to your spiritual journey.
I think if we're on a spiritual journey, we probably come in with a soul that has intended to be on a spiritual journey. But I was born into a world that would probably be not familiar with a lot of you guys. My mother was part of the Russian royal family. My father was a very, very wealthy tycoon. So I grew up in enormous opulence. There were 14 servants for just the little Serge, the only child. You know, my mum had all these royal figures around her, princes and princesses and kings and queens and big society dues. And I felt like a pea in the wrong pod. I felt I'd grown up in the wrong tribe. It's like I was the ugly duckling among the swans or the swan among the ugly ducklings. And there was something about this very that there was something sad in this wealthy world because it was all on the outer and wasn't on the inner. But it gave me certain things. I got a very good education. I went to Oxford University. I later got a PhD. But it taught me to be a macho pig, to believe I was superior to everyone on the planet who didn't have a posh accent like me. It taught me to be entitled. I was better. I was a part of a different class. And so that was the world that I grew up in. And then when I was 23, my father died. And I suddenly realized I wanted to find my soul. My soul had gone lost in all this living the big life. I was a bit of a playboy in those days, and playboys in those days, I was never a druggie or a drinker because I was always a sportsman, so I always kept very fit. So sort of playboys in those days, we just had fancy cars and we went to nightclubs and we escorted model girls, but we didn't do all the drug things that sort of happen sort of nowadays. So I was kind of an innocent playboy. I was never one of these sort of decadent people. I sort of lived my playboy life innocently. But then something happened and I wanted to change it. I didn't want to be this person, this identity. And then I began to move in different circles, to encounter different people. Then I went to California and I met shamans and I worked with spiritual masters and teachers, and I had as many teachers as I could. And then my whole life changed. And so I guess that's my spiritual story. And I guess I've sort of ended up trying to be a servant, trying to help people and doing everything I can to make a difference in other people's lives and writing books about how the planet should change. I wrote 2 books before Amazing Grace on heart and soul. And I guess that's where I am now. I'm a sort of busy guy. I teach a lot of spiritual retreats, personalized retreats. People come from all over the world to meet with me and to talk with me. And I guess in my little way, I try to make a difference.
Thank you for that. And I just want to ask a few things. With the Bolshevik Revolution, I believe they murdered Tsar Nicholas's family, but I guess
Yes.
you would be like a cousin or a nephew of him that escaped before that?
Yeah, exactly. My mother was part of the Russian royal family. So my grandmother escaped with my mother as a little baby. And so there was a huge trauma inside my mother. So she could never really flow with life because she carried that trauma of the Russian Revolution. As, by the way, I feel so many people in Russia are still carrying the trauma. And that's why my lovely country is in the situation it is, because it's only known tyrants. Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, Stalin, Putin, they've all been tyrants. And that's the mindset. And all the tyrants have destroyed their country. And so I feel very sad about the destruction of Russia. But it seems to be a psychic pattern that's being played out.
I want to move forward in time, and I'd like for you to tell us about the time you were in a skiing race and your angel or spirit guide or some entity helped you from crashing.
Yeah, this is an extraordinary story. I started off when I was at Oxford. I was a professional ski racer as well, because in those days, if you had a bit of money, you were able to ski. And I was in the team and skied for England a little bit and for Oxford. And there was one particular downhill race I was doing, Jeff. And in downhill races, you go at 70, 80 miles an hour. And if you've ever seen it, there's big jumps that happen. And I was approaching a jump from the right. Instead of going straight, I was approaching it from the right. And in those days, they didn't have the protection at the edges, and I would have gone straight on and landed on rocks. And I saw this happening, and suddenly, as I was in the air, I felt angels around me. Everything happened slowly. I heard kind of gentle music, and everything, I was lifted up quietly with the most loving and tender hands. And I was, as it were, I imagine I was turned around. It all happened in slow motion. And I landed perfectly. And the whole of the rest of the race was skied in slow motion. I had all the time in the world going at 80 miles an hour. And it was a fantastic race. I beat some of the best skiers in the world at that time because of this intervention. And then a power stayed with me afterwards for about 3 weeks, and my whole life felt blessed and graced. And then at that time, I didn't know how to frame it. But later, I had studied Gurdjieff, and I realized that if you take yourself to the very edge in courage, that you evoke help forces from the universe. And somehow I evoked a help force. It was obviously not my time to go. I was a guy, I was a kid of 19. And I think all my life, Jeff, I felt these help forces, these forces of the universe around me, guiding me and advising me and telling me not to do this and making me miss a plane, although my alarm clock I'd set, it didn't go off. And so I missed the plane, and that plane was crashed and everyone was killed. So my life has been a series of these graced things coming in to help me at difficult times. So that's why I call my book Amazing Grace, because although there have been challenging times in my life, and I think that grace can also be fierce. I've had fierce times in my life. I've always been aware of this helping cosmic force of the universe. And I've never been religious in a traditional way, although I've studied with Sufis and Buddhists and shamans. And at one time I practiced as a shaman, and I had a long moustache, and I would sort of blow whistles and bang drums, and it was great. And I was in California, and all the girls loved it. Huge moustache like this, kind of Salvador Dali-like and shamanish. And so I've done all these things, but essentially my gods are with nature, my dogs, and animals, and out in nature with spirit.
Do you think that this being is like your own personal guardian angel? Or...
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I believe in guardian angels, but I've never wanted, I've always felt connected to a higher source, but I've never felt a channel. I write my books and I give my lectures very quickly, but I never feel that I'm being channeled. But what I do feel is that I reach up with my consciousness into worlds where there's a higher intelligence, and I touch that intelligence, I bring it down, but the way it's expressed is through my Sergeness. So I don't let go and some spirit comes through me as it does to some friends of mine. I have a friend who sort of channels an entity called Chang, and her face goes all Chinesey and her eyes go like this and she speaks like this. I don't do that. I wish I did. It'd be rather nice. It'd be rather nice. I needn't do all the research and work I do. It'd be cool. I could just sort of let the channel do it all.
Now, being a PhD psychotherapist, you have to have walked and probably still exist in academic circles. So if you talk about this among your colleagues, what do they think about this kind of metaphysics?
Well, things are changing. The times, they are changing. When Bob Dylan won his Nobel Prize, I did a spoof on Bob Dylan, and I put my microphone up and I sang "The Times They Are Changing" to thank Bob Dylan for his wonderful thing. Now in academic circles, the ones that I move, it's much more accepted.
That's great.
It's much more accepted. And thank goodness that the world is moving on and that scientific materialism is sort of diminishing. Thank goodness, because it needs to go. Like the psychotherapy that I do with people, I call it heart-centered work, because I realize a lot of people's problems are because their hearts are closed, their hearts are full of trauma and wounds. And so if I can help them open their heart and tune into higher guidance and tune into their higher self, that will help their personalities to evolve. So I don't see any separation between spiritual work and therapeutic work. It's all the same work, it's just at different levels.
Right. I think in your book, Amazing Grace, you talk about how people need to let go of attachments to false narratives. Can you give us some tips on that to becoming, more honest and open-minded and open-hearted?
Well, very often we've got to, I say often, but not always. The way we let go is that something continues not to work for us. Our lives don't work. We play the same old games, but they don't function for us anymore. And so we realize we need to play a different game. We need to play life at a different level. difficulty is that we get very attached to the way we've always been. I mean, I had a character inside me, Jeff, that my friends called Lord Snooty, and he was a sub-personality, and he was taken from a comic strip, but he was a character with a top hat and bow tie and a silver walking stick, and he felt very superior to people. It took me a long time to let go of Lord Snooty because he was very attached to me, and I was very attached to him. But then I remember I had an occasion, I just met a great Californian girl, and she was a shaman. And suddenly she saw me doing my Lord Snooty bit with her, and she gave me such help. And I suddenly realized Lord Snooty doesn't work. And so he disappeared then, and he has not come back since. At least I hope not. But it is challenging, and we need to work to let go. I think that the more we do let go, which comes through meditation, the easier it is to move on. So that the dance in life is through sort of having intention to move on. I choose to move in that direction, but also to let go and be with the flow. A good example of that is, and a tennis player is Roger Federer, who is so relaxed and he never gets ill and he has a tremendous goal, but when he's on the court, he lets go and he flows. So I guess that we all have to give up trying so hard and just to let go. But, Jeff, if we're still identified with our rancid stuff, if we've still got a lot of traumas running us and despair running us, and we let go, we often let go into our traumas and despair. So we need to have a certain level of development before we can really let go. And what we're letting go into is our deeper or more spiritual self.
How does somebody discover the false narratives that they're buying into in the first place?
Well, generally, it happens when it stops working. I mean, I am probably going to get banged on the head from some of your listeners for saying this, but I am not a Trump advocate. And I believe that many of the Republicans have rather fascistic and patriarchal and misogynistic views of the world. Like, women can't have abortions now, etc., etc. I think it's terrible. But how do you let go of those? I think that the human beings who have them are deep down decent human beings. I think that but they somehow got caught into mindsets that take one, as I see it, a long way from being authentically human. And I guess there has to come a point when one realizes that one's beliefs and one's values no longer work for one, or one goes through suffering. I'm afraid that one of the big things that I realize has affected change in my life and that in clients I work with is that when we suffer, we go into deep places that we wouldn't otherwise. And then we get to see ourselves much more clearly and we're able to let go things. But as long as patterns are working for us, we don't sort of let go. I'm working with a woman at the moment, and she's about 52. And she's And she's still very beautiful, but she's not as beautiful as she was when she was 32. And she realizes that she has to let go her attitudes that men will fall at her feet. And she has to give up the sex kitten identity, because she realizes actually that she's grown out of it a long time ago, but she still falls back onto it because it's been there a long time. Identities are like old friends. Some old friends are nice people, and some old friends are not such nice people. And so I'm trying to help her to let go so she can grow up and mature, which, after all, is what we're all trying to do. What I'm trying to do, I'm still trying to grow up. I'm still asking myself, Serge, what are you going to do when you grow up? You know,
Yeah.
I'm still in the process.
Now, you've also had some type of UFO encounter. Can you tell us about that?
When I started off entering my new world, and I let go my old royalty, Oxford upper class identity, I began to get very interested in UFOs and to ask sort of what they were. You know, are they from inner space or outer space? Are they projections from our own unconscious? Are the beings from inside the earth? You know, is this a military thing being sort of carried on by the Russians and the Americans, unbeknownst to us? There's many, many conspiracy theories about this. And then I spent a year in my life where I worked very closely with ayahuasca. And I became a member of, in London, the Daime Church. And during my time with ayahuasca, I would take very high doses, and I would have encounters with beings who felt as if they were beings from other dimensionalities, and that who knew more about my existence than I did of theirs. And I'll tell you one interesting story. In one trip I did, I was suddenly projected into a space around a table with two beings who looked human but not quite, and they were expecting me. And we had a telepathic conversation that they were very wise and intelligent beings. And somehow I felt that they were teaching me things, and I looked at them and I felt a great familiarity. And then after a few minutes, the picture left and I came back to myself. But I realized that these were beings of very, very high intelligence, and they either live on other dimensions or came from other planets. I didn't really know, but all I know, Jeff, is that it's cosmic provinciality at the most extreme to believe that we are the only planet the only intelligent planet. What interests me is that in the 20th century, there were far more UFO sightings than there are now. And Jung talked about them as symbols of wholeness and symbols of transformation. Why are we not seeing them now? I sometimes wonder, why does not a great big craft like Close Encounters with the Third Kind position itself over Russia and boom down a telepathic message and say, unless you stop bombarding Ukraine, we are going to demolish you, or something like that. But that's my little dream. But the truth is that I remain open to the mystery. And in my life, whenever I try to solve a mystery, something else has opened up. And I know that I will never know the final mystery, and that it's not going to be solved through our minds, but it'll come through our hearts. Because I think the most important thing that needs to open for all of humanity is our hearts. And when I met those particular space beings or other dimensional beings or entities for the future or future selves, whatever it was, I felt their heart radiance. And I think that that's the most important thing. How can we open our hearts? How can we be more empathic and more altruistic? Because I think all these qualities live inside us.
In your book, you also write about your experiences with Papa G. Who is or was Papa G?
Papa G had been a disciple of Ramana Maharshi, who was a great Indian saint who taught in silence. And people would come and see Ramana Maharshi and they would become enlightened just by his presence. And I reached a time in my life that I realized I wanted to sit with a holy man, but a real holy man, and not one of these phony holies. And by the way, about 30 years ago, I wrote an article on the dark side of spiritual teachers. And in that article, I discovered that about 80% of them were more sexually deviant than the normal public.
Interesting.
And a lot of these holy men are big phonies. And I don't want to mention any names, but Papa G was not a phony. And he was a wonderful man. And he said to me, Serge, you're trying too hard. I just want you to let go here and talk and enjoy the space in my ashram. And I stayed for 3 months. And I really had wonderful experiences where my ego was not eradicated. I don't believe in the eradication of ego, but I believe that ego should be our servants and not our masters. And what I began to see being at Papa G's was that I was always trying to play a game. I would meet people. I'd either put myself as better than them or less than them, or I needed to use things to justify my existence in the world, i.e., if I hadn't helped 50 old ladies cross the road in one day, I wasn't doing enough to help the world. So I was always struggling to be better, to improve, and Papa G made me feel, Serge, your life is exhausting. You're so struggling to be this better person. Just let go and let your own sacred presence just flow through you. And I did that. And I had a wonderful time. I was there for 3 months. And it was the most important 3 months in my life, just being around this wonderful man. But I was not and am not a guru person. You know, I don't sort of worship at his feet. I didn't kiss his feet. I didn't say, oh, master, I love you. I didn't do all that, but I learned a lot. And I just want to say this. I think that a really important thing for us is if we can really hang around wise, evolved, loving human beings and choose these beings as our friends, because it really helps us to evolve, because we can get in their slipstream. So I've always tried to get into the slipstream of wise guys and wise women. So I've kind of, I've surfed in their wake and sort of got little sort of droplets of their wisdom have sort of fallen out on me. So great experience.
In a way, I feel like you are one of those guys dripping a little knowledge to all of us out here.
I wish. As a friend of mine said, look, Serge, you're too old to still look like a crazy hippie. And I said, once a hippie, always a hippie. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty old-fashioned in one way, you know. So,
you're never going to cut your hair, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And I still wear my jeans and cowboy boots that I always wore. So in certain areas, I don't change, you know.
Now, you were helped by Mother Mera. Can you talk about that?
Mother Mera, I only saw her the once. She didn't have nearly the effect that Papaji had on me. But I went to see her for 4 days in silence because about 2 years ago, I'd fallen in love with a woman who left me and left my heart very wounded. And no amount of psychotherapy and talking about how I'm hurt and working it through, you know, with my relationship with my mother, something remained lodged in my heart. It's like that there was a stone there. Either I'd taken on her pain, because she had a lot of pain, this woman, or I was holding on to the pain that I felt because she'd left me. But for whatever reason, this stone wouldn't move. And then amazing grace happened. I was at a conference and a woman said to me, come and see Mother Mera. I'm going next week. So I went with her. And 4 days of silence in the presence of this radiant feminine, she embodies the feminine goddess. After 4 days, the stone had left my heart and I was free. And actually, that's an interesting story because I think that we all have wounds and they need to be healed in different ways. And we need to listen to our intuition. What's the best way to heal the wound that I have? And so in this case, I had many wounds healed through being in silence with Papaji and in silence with Mother Mera.
Was it after your experience with her that you were going to go to a party and your friend's wife didn't want you to go, but you ended up meeting your soulmate there?
That was a little bit later. Mm. That was much later. Yeah, I met my soulmate at a party that a good friend said, I have to take Serge to this party. And his wife said, no, you can't. It's too late, you haven't asked them. I refuse. And my friend took me along and I met the woman I'd been married to for 8 years, but I've been with for 12 years, which was kind of beautiful. And that's why the grace was amazing, because I've had a lot of hassle and pain and difficulty with women in my life. I've had to I've often chosen the wrong women, that because I had a mother who was beautiful and ice maideny, I would fall in love with women who were beautiful and ice maidenly, and the ones who were sweet and kind, I was not attracted to. And so I had to work through that wound. But now I'm glad to say, at last. But I want to say that I think our wounds are our blessings. Because if I hadn't got the parents I had had that set up certain difficult challenges for me in my life, Jeff, I probably wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing today. So I'm grateful to both of my parents for the challenges that they gave me. And so I feel very grateful to life.
What?
And a prayer we do every day is a gratitude prayer.
What is it?
Great Spirit, thank you for all the blessings. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. Thank you. In fact, I just want to mention at the moment, I'm suffering from a very challenging disease and I'm having very, very tough treatment for it that kind of knocks me out a lot. And I'm seeing it as a blessing. I'm not saying, oh, poor Serge, but it's really a blessing to keep extra fit because I do a lot of sport every day and to do extra meditation. So far from seeing this as a disadvantage, I see it as an advantage because it's helping me grow. And so that's why I increasingly see the difficult things in life as blessings. And in my epilogue, I've got an epilogue where I have my vision for the future. Perhaps it's the most interesting part of my book, Jeff. And my vision of the future is that we're going to go through more difficult experiences on the planet. And probably the next half century will be very challenging, but we're going to break through. We're going to, as the Doors sang, that great song, Jim Morrison, break on through to the other side. I think we're going to break on through to the other side, and there's going to be a huge quantum shift in humanity. So I feel very, positive because I think that these difficulties, these ecological, these financial, these political, these emotional, these social struggles which the world is having to go through, I think is conspiring to have a transformational effect. If it doesn't kill us, it'll transform us. And shocks can kill. Yep. I've had some big shocks in my life, but they've always transformed me. I've been very grateful.
In your opinion, what are some of the common challenges that people face while on their own spiritual path?
I've got a chapter where I address that. If one's not part of some group or some spiritual, if you're not a Buddhist or you're not a Sufi and you're just on the path on your own, you are both your own teacher and your advisor. So you've got to be really awake as what is it that I need? Do I need to go to a master? Do I need to go into psychotherapy? Do I need body work? Do I need to go on drugs to help my depression? Do I need to do microdosing with psilocybin for my depression? We are our own boss. And so it's challenging. So we need to both be the experiencer of what we're going through and evaluate what we need at any particular moment. And a lot of people have been critical to me, Jeff, because they've said, Serge, you've been with a shaman, you studied Buddhism, you've been a Sufi, you've done the mystical traditions of Christianity, but you haven't gone into any of them in depth. Well, there's a truth about that, but there's also a truth that all these spiritual traditions, they all link up. And so that I feel that they've all taught me something. And somehow I've allowed myself to be guided to the right thing that I needed at the time. One thing I wished I'd had earlier, and that's why I try to be that for younger people, is I wish I'd had a mentor, Jeff. I wish I'd had a nice, wise man who, when I was, 23, who'd taken my hand and said, look, I can help you deal with this. I didn't. And my father was not a mentor. He just criticized me for not being more like him. So I try to mentor a lot of young people who are exactly in the situation when I was 23. And I always introduce myself as the only difference between us is that I'm an elder brother who's fucked up more than you because I'm a lot older than you. So anyway, it's challenging, and life is very challenging at the moment for all of us. Financial challenges, emotional challenges, relational challenges. And my two books, my earlier two books on Awakening the Universal Heart and Gateways to the Soul also looked at that. But Amazing Grace, I think, and here's what it looks like, folks. Why Amazing Grace is important, I think, is because the people who've worked with me can release me from the pedestal that they've put me on and can see, Serge has gone through all these traumas and difficulties, and if he has, then I can do it. So I've been very honest about my difficulties in life, like having ADHD, which was in many ways a big handicap, and in other ways an enormous advantage.
What are some of the other events in your life that have been a catalyst for the biggest amount of transformation?
When my father died, he allowed me to come alive because he was so oppressive and was always on my shoulder, pressing me down. When I was released of the burden of my dear father, I say my dear father because he was not a bad man or a dishonest man. He was just a very wounded man. He was a very brilliant man, but was a very damaged and wounded man. He'd been in the First World War and had been wounded, and his twin brother had been blown up in front of him. So this traumatized him, and in those days he called it shell shock, and he never worked through his problems. So being released of my father was an enormous trigger. Another trigger was meeting my wife, who, everyone talks about soulmates. I remember when I was in California, I used to go to, in the 70s, I would go to sort of seminars, and there'd be a guy who'd turn up sort of teaching about them, and he'd always bring his soulmate of the month with him. And I always thought that was a bit phony. But to be with someone who loves you and you love is the most transformational thing in one's life. And she's 20 years younger than me. And I said, Martina, how could you want to marry an old critter, an old fogey, an old podger? I don't know if you have that word podger in Texas.
Yep.
But anyway, yeah. And she said, well, you see me. I feel seen by you. And I said to her, well, I feel seen by you as well. And so somehow, if we're seen by someone, Jeff, we get taken into their hearts. My wife takes me into her heart. I take her into my heart. And somehow it allows me to do things that I was never able to do before. And I think love is the great, great healing force. And because I was so wounded in that area of love, I wrote a big book called Awakening the Universal Heart, because I think it's so important. When we have love, when there's a commune, we commune with people, we enter their space, we allow them to enter our space. And there's a synergy, and we move through the great wound that is the great wound of humanity, our disconnectedness, our sense that we're all separate, isolated, sad little egos struggling on our own. And that's the big wound. And I think that that's the wound that we have to heal. And there's so many healers in the world, psychic healers, spiritual healers, hand-on healers, Reiki healers, Serge healers, Jeff healers, because you heal in your own way by putting on these programs. And I'm sure you do other wonderful things as well. I don't know. But if I feel you in my heart, Jeff, I feel you're a very generous-souled human being. And I think that heart is the most important thing in the world. And that's what's going to heal our planet, I think. I'm just thinking if there's another funny experience that I can sort of. There's two psychic stories that I can tell you.
Okay.
One that's quite interesting. When my father died, I had a psychic friend called Gwenny, who I told you earlier, she channeled this being called Wong, this Chinese being. After my father died, Gwenny rang me half an hour sort of later and said, "Serge, has your father died?" I said, "Yes." "Why?" She said, "He plunged into me. I was suddenly sitting, having a cup of tea, and suddenly this explosion plummeted into me, crying and shaking and saying, 'Please tell Serge, I'm so sorry for everything. I never knew I hurt him so much. Please tell Serge.'" And she said to me, "Well, that's your father. But it's kind of interesting that the moment he died, his spirit guides at the end of the circle of light, they said to him, 'Look, you better go and apologize to Serge,' because it was very important. And that was a very, very important occasion, that he apologized at the moment he was dying, that he knew sort of what he'd done. Another thing I want to say that always interests me is that I've taught a lot of workshops on the shadow and the dark side of life and how to deal with evil in the world, because I think it's a real issue and it can't just be spiritualized away. And on many occasions, I've had 30 people on the floor screaming, and I'm sitting in my chair thinking, I've gone and done it now. How the hell am I going to get out of this? What? I don't know what to do. They're all screaming. There's 30 of them. It's not just 2. And then so often quiet has come into me, and I've just known exactly what to do. 2 hours later, everything has been resolved. And I've never known how it's happened, but I felt that guidance. And I say to all of you listening that whenever you go for it, you really go for it spiritually, you put yourself out, you will be given help. Because at this moment, the spiritual forces or the helping forces or the amazing grace forces or the God forces or the power of the universe forces or the spirit of the universe forces, whatever we want to call it, they're going to be with us. They're going to be with you and helping you and supporting you. So you can ask for that help. And I believe that the prayer is just as important as meditation. And we can do our own prayer. It's a kind of dialogue with the higher forces of the universe. Or if we want to pray to a specific deity or whatever, it's very, very important. But please pray and ask for what you need and ask for what the planet needs and ask for healing and ask for guidance. You know, Jesus said, ask and ye shall receive. It's kind of important. I think that there was one more thing I wanted to tell you.
Well, wasn't there a time when your mother died that all the flowers fell off the trees or something?
I was doing a therapy session as a client, and above my therapist's head, there was a big plant. And I just begun the session, and suddenly a huge sadness came into me. I didn't know why, because, you know, I was feeling okay. And during the course of the session, all the petals came off this plant, and they were on the floor. And this full plant, there were now about 50 petals on the floor. And I remarked to my therapist that this is quite interesting, and she said, yes, it's funny, and so some of them fell on my head. And as soon as I got home, my stepfather rang me to say that my mother had just passed away. So in a way, both my parents left messages to say goodbye in their own particular way. And that was moving. And I think we need to realize that we do live in a very moving and very special world. And the guidance I would give is to give more time to open to that world and do the things that touch your heart. Listen to the music that touches you. Be out in nature. Commune with nature. Ask it to heal you. Be with animals. They're such wise beings. I have a lovely little dog. My wife has taken her away at this moment in case she barks in meditation. And be with the things that make your heart sing, because that's the way to your wholeness and your healing. Be with people who touch you. Do things that open you, and resist too much online sort of media. Because, it's very obvious this point, but the more we're connected online, the more we disconnect offline. And it's the offline connections with our fellow human beings that are the really important things.
Serge, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always say to everyone, please be in touch. I can help in any way. If anyone ever wants to work with me or do a session with me, a first session is always free. We work for an hour or an hour and a half so that you can see if I'm the person you need, and I work with people all over the world. And I also do online, and I also do individualized retreats where one or two people come, a father and son, or two sisters, or husband and wife, brother and sister, or just one person. And we spend 5 or 6 days together, a lot out in nature, and we work on all the issues in your life. So I used to do retreats for 30 people until a person came up and said, "Hey, Serge, I'd love to do a retreat just with you and not share you with 29 other people." So I've been doing these individualized retreats. And you can look at my website. It's just Google Serge Beddington-Behrens and you'll find out all about me. There's a lot of YouTube sort of lectures, but my website is sergebeddingtonbehrens.com. SergeBeddingtonBehrens.com. So please be in touch. And if it's to disagree with things and say, "Serge, I think you talked a lot of bullshit and I really want to put you right," please feel free, because it's really important that we all put our opinions out. And I don't want to be sort of Mr. Right. So if you'd like to be in touch, I'd be delighted to be in touch with you. And if you just want to have one session to talk and I can help you, absolutely free. That's my service. And by the way, I think that we all ought to give and do our service. So I'd be very, very delighted.
Do you have any new books or anything else that you're working on that you want us to know about?
I tell you, perhaps I can tell you just about my last two books that have come out in the last 6 years. So just so you know, Awakening the Universal Heart, and they both have exercises, and this one especially, and so it's a sort of work in progress. But I guess that they all go together. And my new book, which Jeff might interview me about, if he can still put up with me again, that'll probably come out in 2 years, is called not cogitations, but cogitations, the thoughts of an old codger. And it's going to take the form of letters to my darling daughter. I have a beautiful 23-year-old daughter who's a really kind of cool lady, and we're very close. And I want to do a series of letters to her. There'll be letters to young people, how to deal with the challenging world that we all live in today.
Well, Serge, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Listen to your intuition. And don't be polite. A year ago, I went to a new barber's. And as I sat down on the barber's seat, I knew I should get up because I knew he was going to absolutely demolish me. But being English, I was very polite. So I sat down, and this bit was hanging out and he forgot to cut that bit. And being English, I was terribly polite and gave him a tip. I said, "Thank you very much." Blah, blah, blah. But why didn't I get up and go? And also, when we're in relationships, we have feelings with the person we're with. Why don't we act on them? And we feel there's something that's not right. Act on it. And then we feel there's something that is right. I need to be here. Act on it. Because your intuition is your deeper self or your psychic self or your sacred self telling you what's right. And I believe that we all have an inner guidance manual telling us how to live, what to do, each step. But we don't open the manual. It's like getting a bit of electronic machinery, as I do, and think that you can fix it. it up without bothering to look at the manual, and you bugger it up. So read the manual, and it's inside your heart.
Well, Serge, thank you for your message. Thank you for being my guest, and I'll see you in 2 years when your new book comes out.
Great. Jeff, it was a real honor to hang out with you for, God, nearly an hour and a half. And it was really lovely. And your sort of graceful presence just allowed me to be me. So thank you for being a space that allowed me to be me in all my zaniness. Because we've all got to be us in all our zaniness.
That's true. Serge, the pleasure was all mine.
God bless.
God bless you. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.